Vodka and bad decisions reeked from the man slumped against the alley wall. He was bleeding from the lip, stripped of his Rolex, and babbling about profit margins to a guy holding a switchblade. Nora recognized the bruised billionaire instantly. He was her boss, and he was about to die. Neon light flickered through the greasy window of O'Malley's pub, casting a sickly red glow over the scarred wooden bar. Nora wiped down the surface for the fourth time that hour. The rag was gray, smelling aggressively of bleach and stale beer. It was 1:45 a.m. on a Saturday. Her feet throbbed in her worn-out sneakers, the cheap rubber soles offering zero defense against the hard linoleum floor. She hated this place. She hated the smell, the sticky floor, the men who left crinkled dollar bills under their wet glasses like it was a grand gesture. But hatred didn't pay for pediatric asthma inhalers. Fox Holdings, her day job, barely covered rent and groceries. O'Malley's paid for the medical bills. It was a simple, brutal math that dictated her life. Nora threw the damp rag into the sink and grabbed the heavy trash bag from the corner bin. It dragged along the floor, filled with broken glass and wet cardboard. She pushed open the heavy steel back door, stepping into the alley. The cold October air hit her face, a brief, sharp relief from the suffocating heat of the bar. That was when she heard the scuffle. It wasn't a loud fight. It was the quiet, desperate sound of a struggle meant to be kept hidden. A wet thud, a low groan, the scrape of the leather shoes against wet asphalt. Nora froze, adjusting her grip on the trash bag. She peered down the narrow alley, past the overflowing dumpsters. 3 figures stood in the shadows. 2 were aggressively crowding the third. "Just unlock the phone, man," a raspy voice hissed. "Face ID. Put your face to the screen. Open the crypto wallet." "Gross margins," the third man slurred, his voice thick and heavy. You're not accounting for overhead. Idiots." Nora's stomach dropped. She knew that voice. She had heard it echoing across the polished marble lobby of the Fox building, commanding boardrooms, dismissing executives with a single sharp syllable. Declan Fox, the billionaire CEO of the firm, where she spent 50 hours a week crunching numbers in a windowless cubicle on the 4th floor. He was leaning heavily against the brick wall, his custom-tailored suit covered in street grime. His tie was gone. His white shirt was torn at the collar. Blood trickled from a split lip. One of the men had him by the throat, pinning him to the brick, while the other was trying to force a smartphone in front of Fox's bruised face. The man holding the phone also held a switchblade, the metal catching the faint light of a distant street lamp. Nora didn't have time to think about the absurdity of the situation. Why was a billionaire outside a dive bar in the worst part of the city? It didn't matter. They were going to empty his accounts, and then they were going to stick that blade in his ribs to ensure he didn't call the police. She dropped the trash bag. It hit the ground with a loud crash of breaking bottles. The 3 men jerked their heads toward her. "Hey!" Nora shouted. Her voice wasn't hysterical. It was flat, loud, and authoritative. The voice of a mother who had broken up 1,000 playground fights, amplified by the pure, cynical exhaustion of a woman working a double shift. She walked forward, stepping fully into the light. She grabbed an empty, thick-glassed whiskey bottle from the top of the nearest recycling bin. She didn't brandish it. She just held it casually by the neck, letting it rest against her thigh. "Cops just pulled up front," Nora lied smoothly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Bouncer flagged them down for a noise complaint. They're walking through the kitchen right now." The man with the knife narrowed his eyes. "Mind your business, bitch." I don't care about him, Nora said, gesturing loosely to Fox with her free hand. I care about the fact that if you bleed him out back here, this alley becomes a crime scene, and I can't leave until 6 a.m. Drop the phone. You're bluffing. Nora lifted her chin. Stay and find out. Sirens cut out on 4th Street 2 minutes ago. You hear anything? They run silent when they're close. It was a gamble, a massive, stupid gamble. But street thugs are rarely looking for a hard fight. They want easy money. The man with the knife looked at his partner. They calculated the risk. The payoff was huge, but the window was closing. Screw it, the man holding Fox's throat muttered. He shoved the CEO hard against the brick and let go. Fox crumpled to the asphalt like a puppet with cut strings. The two men backed away, pocketing the phone, and vanished down the opposite end of the alley, blending into the city's shadows. Nora stood perfectly still for 5 seconds, waiting for her adrenaline to peak and crash. She exhaled a shaky breath, dropped the whiskey bottle back into the bin, and walked over to the heap of expensive wool and poor life choices on the ground. Mr. Fox, she said, crouching beside him. He groaned, rolling onto his back. Up close, he looked awful. The bruising around his eye was already turning a deep, angry purple. He reeked of high-end vodka and copper. Liquidity, he mumbled, his eyes rolling back slightly. Cash flow is king. Right. Let's get your cash flow off the pavement, Nora grunted. She hooked her arms under his armpits. He was heavy. A solid 6'2" of muscle and expensive dinners. She hoisted him up, her knees popping in protest. Who are you? He slurred, leaning heavily against her. Your guardian angel. I charge $20 an hour plus tips. She half-dragged, half-carried him toward her car, parked 2 blocks away under a flickering street lamp. It was a 2010 Honda Civic, with a dent in the passenger door and a heater that smelled like burning dust. She practically threw him into the passenger seat. He slumped against the window. Nora climbed into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and started the engine. She dug into his jacket pockets, ignoring the voice in her head screaming that she was crossing a massive professional boundary. She found his wallet. The leather was softer than her own skin. She flipped it open, found his driver's license, and punched the address into her phone's GPS. It was a penthouse in the financial district, a fortress in the sky. The drive was silent, save for the rattle of her muffler and Fox's slow, wet breathing. She rolled the window down an inch so he wouldn't throw up on her cheap upholstery. When they arrived at the underground parking garage of his building, the security guard stepped out of his booth, taking one look at her beat-up Civic with obvious disdain. Nora didn't roll down her window. She just reached over, grabbed Fox by the hair, gently but firmly, and pulled his face toward the glass. The guard's eyes went wide. He hit the button, and the massive steel gate rolled up. Nora hauled him into the private elevator. She used his limp hand to press the fingerprint scanner for the penthouse level. The doors slid open to reveal a living space larger than her entire apartment building. It was cold, minimalist, and completely devoid of personality. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering skyline of the city. She dumped him onto an ivory-colored Italian leather sofa. He groaned, shifting his weight. Nora immediately pulled his muddy shoes off, dropping them onto the hardwood floor. She wasn't going to be responsible for ruining a $30,000 couch. She went to the kitchen, found a glass, filled it with tap water, and set it on the glass coffee table next to a bottle of ibuprofen she found in his immaculate bathroom. Nora stood over him for a moment. The great Declan Fox, the man who had fired 3 executives last week without blinking. He looked small right now, vulnerable, human. She didn't take a picture. She didn't leave a note. She simply turned around, got back in the elevator, and went home to her son. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a freight train. Nora's alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m. She slammed her hand onto her phone, silencing it before it could wake Ludwig. The apartment was freezing. The radiator hissed but offered no actual heat. She rolled out of bed, her body aching from the weekend's double shifts. She walked into the tiny kitchen, putting water on to boil for oatmeal. She checked the counter. The plastic asthma inhaler sat next to the sink. The counter on the back read 12. 12 puffs left. That was barely a week if the cold weather flared up his lungs. Nora rubbed her face, chewing the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. She would ask HR about an advance on her paycheck today. Again. By 7 a.m., she had fed Ludwig, wrestled him into his winter coat, and dropped him off at the subsidized morning care program near his elementary school. By 8:15 a.m., she was emerging from the subway station, blending into the sea of gray, navy, and black suits pouring into the Fox Holdings building. The contrast between her weekend and her weekday always gave her whiplash. At O'Malley's, she was invisible, a machine built to pour drinks and scrub counters. Here, in the gleaming glass monolith, she was equally invisible. A level 2 analyst buried in spreadsheets, tasked with finding discrepancies in corporate ledgers. She sat at her cubicle on the 4th floor. The air conditioning was aggressive. She logged into her computer, pulled up the data sets for the upcoming tech acquisition, and began to work. She assumed Declan Fox wouldn't remember a thing. Blackout drunks rarely do. He probably woke up on his couch, assumed his driver had dragged him up there, and fired someone for losing his phone. She had spent the entire Sunday convincing herself that the incident was a closed loop. She had saved a life, kept her job, and avoided a mess. At 10:47 a.m., the phone on her desk rang. Nora jumped slightly. Nobody called her desk phone. They emailed. She picked up the receiver. Nora Brooks. Ms. Brooks, this is Sarah, Mr. Fox's executive assistant. He would like to see you in his office immediately. The blood drained from Nora's face. She stared at the blank partition of her cubicle. Am I being terminated? He didn't state the nature of the meeting, Ms. Brooks. The 42nd floor. Please come up. The line went dead. Nora stood up. Her legs felt like lead. Had security cameras caught her license plate? Did he think she was the one who robbed him? Did he find out she moonlighted at a dive bar, a direct violation of the company's moonlighting clause in her contract? She walked to the elevator banks. The ride up took far too long. With every floor, the carpet in the hallways got thicker, the lighting softer, the art on the walls more expensive. She stepped out onto the 42nd floor. Sarah, a woman whose suit probably cost more than Nora's car, nodded toward the massive oak double doors. Go right in. Nora pushed the doors open. Declan Fox's office was a corner suite with panoramic views of the city. He was standing behind his desk, looking at a tablet. He wore a charcoal suit that fit perfectly. His hair was impeccably styled. But when he looked up, the harsh daylight from the windows caught his face. The bruise on his jaw was covered by high-end concealer, but Nora's sharp eyes caught the faint, discolored swelling beneath the makeup. His split lip was still visible. He set the tablet down. He didn't smile. He didn't offer her a seat. You drove a 2010 Honda Civic into my private garage at 2:40 a.m. on Saturday, Declan said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, completely steady, completely sober. Nora swallowed hard. Yes, sir. You bypassed security by shoving my face against the glass of the booth. It seemed the most efficient route, sir. A microscopic twitch hit the corner of his mouth. He picked up a file from his desk. My phone and watch were gone, but my wallet was on the kitchen counter, nothing missing. You left a glass of water and 2 Advil on the table. You took off my shoes, and then you left. I took off your shoes because your couch looked like full-grain aniline leather. Mud stains are a nightmare to get out of that. Declan stopped. He actually stopped and stared at her. He had expected her to cower. He had expected her to ask for a reward, to leverage the situation, to hold his momentary lapse of judgment over his head. Why didn't you call the police? He asked, his tone shifting from accusatory to genuinely curious. Police take hours, Nora answered practically, crossing her arms defensively. Those men had a knife. If I waited for the cops, you would have bled out behind a dumpster. If I stayed to give a statement, I would have missed my Sunday morning shift at the diner. I don't have time to be a witness, Mr. Fox. You work at O'Malley's and a diner? He glanced at the file. You make $85,000 a year as an analyst here. That's above market rate for your tier. I have a 6-year-old with severe asthma. My copays are higher than my rent. $85,000 doesn't stretch in this city when you're a single mother. She narrowed her eyes. If you brought me up here to fire me for violating the moonlighting clause, just do it. I need to know so I can start sending out resumes. Declan looked at her. Really looked at her. He saw the dark circles under her eyes, the cheap fabric of her blouse, the defensive, rigid posture of a woman who was used to fighting for every single inch of ground she stood on. He didn't pretend to forget. He didn't offer her $1 million like some fairy tale prince. He was a businessman. He recognized an undervalued asset when he saw one. You didn't flinch when they pulled a knife, Declan said quietly. You didn't panic. You calculated the risk, executed a bluff, and secured the objective. You did it cleanly and efficiently. Nora blinked. I guess. I'm firing you from your position on the 4th floor, Declan said. Nora's breath hitched. Her hands curled into fists. As of this moment, Declan continued smoothly, tossing her personnel file into the trash can next to his desk. You are promoted to senior strategy consultant. You answer directly to me. Your salary is doubled, effective immediately, which should negate your need to serve cheap vodka to degenerates. You will join the merger and acquisition teams on the Vanguard Tech deal. Nora stared at him, entirely derailed. I don't have M&A experience. I run ledgers. You have a spine, Declan countered flatly. My current team is full of cowards who tell me what I want to hear. I don't need yes men. I need someone who isn't afraid to drag me out of the mud when I'm making a fatal error. Your office is down the hall. Report to Sarah for your new credentials. We have a briefing at noon. Don't be late. The transition was brutal. Declan Fox did not hand out charity. The promotion was not a gift. It was a crucible. For the next 3 months, Nora's life became a blur of endless spreadsheets, hostile negotiations, and midnight strategy sessions. The Vanguard Tech deal was a monster, a convoluted mess of hidden liabilities and inflated assets. But Nora thrived. The same grit that allowed her to survive double shifts and ER visits fueled her in the boardroom. She learned quickly. She was ruthless with data. And exactly as Declan had predicted, She was the only person in the room who didn't flinch when he lost his temper. It happened on a Tuesday in November. It was 11 p.m. The executive boardroom was littered with empty coffee cups and half-eaten takeout containers. The rest of the team had been dismissed hours ago, leaving only Nora and Declan. Declan was pacing the length of the room, his tie undone, his sleeves rolled up. "We aggressively push for a 30% discount on their valuation," he said, tapping a marker against the whiteboard. "They're desperate. They'll fold." "No, they won't," Nora said without looking up from her laptop. Declan stopped pacing. He turned to her, his eyes narrowing. "Excuse me? You're looking at their gross revenue, Declan," she said. It had taken a month for her to drop the Mr. Fox, a silent concession on his part that they were fighting in the same trench. "Look at their subsidiary leases. They're hiding massive debt in offshore shell companies. If we acquire them at 30%, we inherit those leases. The SEC will bleed us dry in fines." "I ran the projections myself," Declan snapped, his ego bruised. "Then you ran them wrong," Nora shot back, finally looking up. She met his glare evenly. "You're blinded by the tech patents. You want the IP so badly, you're ignoring the toxic waste underneath it. Drop the acquisition or restructure the deal as an asset purchase only." Silence hung in the room, heavy and thick. Declan stared at her, his jaw tight. Any other employee would have backed down, apologized, or softened the blow. Nora just held his gaze, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. Slowly, the tension drained from Declan's shoulders. He tossed the marker onto the table. He walked over, pulled out the chair next to hers, and sat down. He leaned in, looking at her screen. "Show me the shell companies," he murmured. The proximity made Nora's pulse spike, an involuntary physical reaction she fiercely suppressed. He smelled of bergamot and expensive coffee. She pointed to the spreadsheet, guiding him through the labyrinth of numbers she had untangled. "You're right," he admitted quietly after 10 minutes. He dragged a hand through his hair, looking exhausted. "I almost bought a sinking ship." "You're welcome," she said softly. He turned his head to look at her. The harsh fluorescent lighting of the boardroom softened the sharp angles of his face. The dynamic between them had shifted over the months. It was no longer a transaction. It was a partnership forged in high-stress environments. "You never talk about your son," Declan noted abruptly, changing the subject entirely. Nora stiffened. She closed the laptop. "There's nothing to talk about. He's 6. He likes dinosaurs and breathing normally. Does he have a father? He has me." Nora's tone was defensive, a steel door slamming shut. "I keep my personal life out of the office, Declan. It's cleaner that way." Declan watched her pack up her bag. He noticed the slight fraying at the edges of her leather tote. He noticed that while she now earned enough to buy designer clothes, she still wore practical, unassuming suits. She saved every penny. She was preparing for a disaster that hadn't happened yet. "I'm not asking as your boss, Nora," he said gently. "You are my boss," she replied, slinging the bag over her shoulder. "Good night, Declan. I'll have the asset purchase drafted by 9 a.m. She walked out, leaving him alone in the quiet boardroom. Declan watched the door long after she had gone. He realized with a strange, uncomfortable tightening in his chest that he didn't just respect Nora Brooks, he cared about her. And he had absolutely no idea what to do with that information. The climax of the Vanguard deal arrived in mid-December. It was a Friday night. The snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor. The entire legal and finance teams were on standby. The final contracts needed to be signed and submitted before midnight, or the asset purchase would fall through. At 7:30 p.m., Nora was at her desk, reviewing the final indemnity clauses when her cell phone buzzed. She glanced at it. A text from Mrs. Higgins, her elderly babysitter. Pipe burst. Water everywhere. Plumber coming. I have to leave. I'm so sorry, Nora. Nora stared at the screen, panic rising in her throat like bile. She couldn't leave. If she left, the deal stalled. But she couldn't leave Ludwig alone in a flooding apartment. She picked up the phone, dialing frantically. Every backup sitter went to voicemail. The emergency drop-in centers were closed due to the blizzard. She was entirely, completely trapped. 10 minutes later, she made the only choice she could. She ordered an expensive black car to pick up Ludwig and bring him to the building. By 8:15 p.m., Nora was dragging a sleepy, bewildered 6-year-old into the hushed, sterile halls of the executive floor. Ludwig was bundled in a puffy winter coat, clutching a worn-out stuffed triceratops. He was wheezing slightly from the cold air. "Okay, buddy," Nora whispered, leading him into an empty, glass-walled conference room adjacent to her office. "I need you to be a secret agent. Secret agents are very, very quiet. Sit here. Here are your crayons. Here is the iPad. Do not leave this room." "I'm hungry, Mom," Ludwig mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "I know, baby. I'll get you something from the vending machine in 10 minutes. I just have to finish this paper." She kissed his forehead, her heart breaking at the sight of him in this cold, corporate environment. She cracked the door open an inch so she could hear him, then rushed back to her desk. 30 minutes later, the final clause was approved. Nora hit print, a massive wave of relief washing over her. She just needed to get Declan's signature, and they were done. She grabbed the stack of papers and jogged toward his corner office. He wasn't there. Frowning, Nora turned back down the hallway. As she approached her own office, she froze. The door to the glass conference room was wide open. Nora dropped the contracts. They scattered across the carpet. She sprinted to the doorway, her blood turning to ice. If Ludwig had wandered off, if he had triggered an alarm, if Declan had found him, she skidded to a halt in the doorway. Declan Fox, the ruthless, untouchable billionaire, was sitting on the floor of the conference room. He had taken off his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves. His expensive silk tie was draped over the stuffed triceratops. Ludwig was sitting next to him, showing him a drawing on a piece of printer paper. "See, the red ones are the lasers," Ludwig explained seriously, tapping a crayon against the paper. "Because the spaceship needs to blast the bad guys." "Makes sense," Declan nodded solemnly. "But if you put the thrusters on the back, you get more speed. Less time fighting bad guys, more time flying." He picked up a blue crayon and drew 2 massive engines on the back of the clumsy, childish drawing. "Oh, whoa," Ludwig breathed. "That's cool. Are you my mom's boss?" "I am," Declan said. "She works a lot," Ludwig said, his innocent voice carrying a weight that made Nora's throat close up. "But she said she's buying me the good medicine now, so I don't cough at night." Declan stopped coloring. His hand hovered over the paper. He stared at the drawing, the cynical armor he wore every day cracking right down the middle. He swallowed hard. The realization of what this woman fought for every single day, hitting him with the force of a physical blow. She hadn't just saved him in that alley. She saved this little boy every single day. against impossible odds. He looked up and saw Nora standing in the doorway. She was trembling slightly, looking defensive, exhausted, and absolutely terrified. Declan didn't yell. He didn't ask why an unauthorized child was on the executive floor. He stood up slowly, dusting off his slacks. He walked over to the door, stopping inches away from her. "The contracts?" he asked softly. "Printed," Nora whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry. The sitter canceled, the pipes burst. I had nowhere else." "Stop." Declan reached out, his large warm hand gently gripping her shoulder. The touch grounded her, halting her panicked spiral. "Nora, stop." She looked up into his eyes. There was no pity there, only a profound, grounding respect, and something much warmer that she hadn't allowed herself to see until now. "I ordered pizza," Declan said, his voice dropping to a low, comforting register. "It should be here in 5 minutes. Go sign the final page. Email it to legal." He looked back at Ludwig, who was happily coloring the thrusters blue. Declan smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. He turned back to Nora. "Go finish the deal, Nora. We've got this." Nora stood there for a second, the crushing weight of her solo existence lifting just a fraction of an inch. She didn't have to carry it all. Not tonight. She let out a long, shaky breath, nodded once, and went to sign the papers. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was drowning. Don't let Nora and Declan's story end here. If you felt the tension, the grit, and the quiet romance of two worlds colliding, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who appreciates a strong, fiercely independent single mom, showing a billionaire what real power looks like. Don't forget to subscribe for more deeply emotional, grounded dramas that prove sometimes the greatest rescues happen off paper. Drop a comment below. Would you have left him in the alley?